Welcome back to our journey through the heart of ancient Rome, a world where empires were forged, heroes rose, and tragedies shaped the course of history. If you've joined us for the stories of Cleopatra, the cunning queen who captivated empires, Julius Caesar, the visionary who redefined Rome, or Augustus, the architect of an empire that spanned continents, then today we're stepping into a darker, more intricate tale. This is the story of Tiberius Claudius Nero, the man who inherited the Roman Empire from Augustus, yet remains one of its most enigmatic and controversial figures, shrouded in mystery and debate. Tiberius is a name that echoes through history, but not with the warmth of admiration. Born in 42 BC into the elite Claudian family, he grew up under the immense shadow of Augustus, Rome's first emperor. From a young age, Tiberius was molded for greatness, trained in the arts of war, rhetoric, and governance. He proved his worth as a general, leading Roman legions to stunning victories in the rugged terrains of Germania and Illyricum, securing the empire's frontiers. For over 2 decades, he held the reins of an empire at its zenith. Yet, when we speak of Tiberius, we conjure images of isolation, suspicion, and whispered tales of tyranny. Why does his name evoke such unease? Was he a cruel despot, a puppet of power, or a man burdened by a role he never sought? In this video, we'll unravel the full arc of Tiberius's life, from his promising youth, marked by military triumphs, to the personal tragedies that scarred him and the turbulent reign that defined his legacy. We'll delve into his complex relationship with Augustus, who saw him as a reluctant heir, and the shadowy figures like Sejanus, whose ambitions turned Rome's court into a nest of intrigue. We'll explore his policies that stabilized the empire, his retreat to the island of Capri, and the myths that swirled around his final years. Above all, we'll ask, was Tiberius truly the emperor in the shadows, a villain crafted by his enemies, or a misunderstood leader navigating an impossible path? Over the next hour, we'll journey through the heart of Rome's golden age, peeling back the layers of a man whose story is as compelling as it is divisive. If you're drawn to tales of power, betrayal, and the human cost of empire, this is a story you won't want to miss. So, settle in, and let's step into the world of Tiberius, a man caught between the glory of Rome and the darkness of his own legacy. Let's begin. In the twilight of the Roman Republic, as the city of Rome basked in the glory of its newfound imperial might, one question loomed over the eternal city: who would inherit the vast empire crafted by Augustus? The answer lay in a man whose life was a tapestry of triumph and torment: Tiberius Claudius Nero. A general of unmatched skill, a son bound by duty, and a reluctant heir to an empire he never sought, Tiberius's path to the throne was anything but straightforward. In this chapter, we'll journey through the years that shaped him, from his early triumphs on the battlefield to the personal sacrifices that scarred him, and the political intrigues that propelled him to the pinnacle of power. This is the story of a man caught between destiny and despair, forging a legacy that would echo through the ages. Tiberius was born on November 16, 42 BC, into the illustrious Claudian family, a lineage synonymous with Roman prestige and power. His father, Tiberius Claudius Nero, was a seasoned politician and a loyal supporter of Julius Caesar, navigating the treacherous waters of Rome's civil wars. His mother, Livia Drusilla, was a woman of formidable intellect and ambition, whose influence would shape Tiberius's life in ways he could scarcely have imagined. But Tiberius's early years were marked by upheaval. The assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC plunged Rome into chaos, and the young Tiberius, barely 2 years old, was swept up in the turmoil. His family fled Rome to escape the wrath of Caesar's enemies, seeking refuge in Sicily and Greece before returning to a city transformed by the rise of Octavian, the future Augustus. When Tiberius was 4, his life took a dramatic turn. Livia divorced his father to marry Octavian, a union that was as much a political alliance as a personal one. This marriage catapulted Tiberius into the heart of Rome's new imperial family, but it also placed him under the unrelenting scrutiny of a man who would become both his stepfather and the architect of an empire. Growing up in Augustus's household was a double-edged sword. Tiberius was afforded the finest education Rome could offer: philosophy, rhetoric, military strategy, and the art of governance were drilled into him from a young age. He was groomed for greatness, yet he was never the favored son. Augustus had other heirs in mind: his nephew Marcellus, his friend Agrippa, and later his grandsons Gaius and Lucius. Tiberius, though capable, was often relegated to the sidelines, his achievements overshadowed by the charisma and promise of others. But if there was one arena where Tiberius could prove his worth, it was the battlefield. By his early 20s, he was already making a name for himself as a commander of exceptional talent. In 20 BC, at the age of 22, Tiberius was entrusted with a delicate mission to the eastern provinces. The Parthians, Rome's perennial rivals, had captured Roman standards during a humiliating defeat years earlier. Tiberius's task was to negotiate their return, a feat that required diplomacy as much as strength. His success was a triumph, earning him accolades and showcasing his ability to wield both tact and authority. He went on to lead campaigns in Armenia, securing Rome's influence in the region and solidifying his reputation as a rising star. Tiberius's true proving ground, however, was the rugged frontier of Germania and Illyricum. In 12 BC, he was sent to the Rhine, where Germanic tribes posed a constant threat to Roman territories. His campaigns were methodical, disciplined, and relentless. He subdued rebellious tribes, fortified Roman outposts, and earned the loyalty of his legions through his stoic leadership. His efforts in the Pannonian Revolt of 69 AD were particularly grueling. The uprising in the Balkans threatened Rome's eastern provinces, and Tiberius led a protracted campaign to crush the rebellion, enduring harsh winters and treacherous terrain. His victories were hard-won, but they secured the empire's borders and demonstrated his strategic brilliance. These successes were not merely military. They were political lifelines, proving Tiberius's worth to an emperor who remained skeptical of his potential. Yet, for all his accomplishments, Tiberius's personal life was a crucible of sacrifice and sorrow. In 11 BC, Augustus forced him to marry Julia, the emperor's daughter, as part of a dynastic strategy to unite the Claudian and Julian families. This meant divorcing Vipsania Agrippina, the woman Tiberius loved deeply and with whom he had a son, Drusus. The divorce was a devastating blow. Ancient sources recount how Tiberius was heartbroken, and years later, a chance encounter with Vipsania in Rome reduced him to tears. His marriage to Julia, by contrast, was a catastrophe. Julia was vibrant, independent, and accustomed to the adulation of Rome's elite. Tiberius, reserved and austere, was her opposite in every way. Their union was plagued by mutual resentment, infidelity, and public scandal. Julia's extravagant lifestyle and rumored affairs humiliated Tiberius, who was already struggling to carve out a place in Augustus's court. By 6 BC, Tiberius had reached a breaking point. Overwhelmed by personal anguish and political frustration, he made a decision that shocked Rome. He withdrew from public life and retired to the island of Rhodes. This self-imposed exile was unprecedented for a man of his stature. To many, it appeared as though Tiberius was abandoning his responsibilities. perhaps even his ambitions. Some believed he was fleeing Julia's scandals. Others saw it as a protest against Augustus's preference for other heirs. Whatever the motive, his retreat to Rhodes was a bold and risky move. For 7 years, Tiberius lived in relative obscurity, immersing himself in philosophy, astronomy, and reflection, far from the intrigues of Rome. But his absence only deepened Augustus's distrust. The emperor viewed Tiberius's withdrawal as a betrayal, and their relationship grew increasingly strained. During Tiberius's exile, Augustus's plans for succession began to unravel. Marcellus had died in 23 BC, Agrippa in 12 BC. By the time Tiberius was in Rhodes, Augustus was pinning his hopes on his grandsons, Gaius and Lucius, Julia's sons by Agrippa, but tragedy struck. Lucius died in 2 AD, followed by Gaius in 4 AD, both under circumstances that sparked rumors of foul play. With his preferred heirs gone, Augustus was forced to turn to Tiberius, the man he had long overlooked. In 4 AD, Tiberius was recalled to Rome and formally adopted as Augustus's son and heir. The adoption came with a condition. Tiberius was required to adopt Germanicus, his nephew and the son of his late brother Drusus, as his own heir, ensuring the Julian line would continue. This arrangement underscored Tiberius's role as a reluctant placeholder, a stopgap in Augustus's dynastic plans. Tiberius's return to Rome marked a new chapter in his career. He resumed his military duties, leading campaigns in Germania to avenge the catastrophic defeat of Varus in the Teutoburg forest in 9 AD. His victories restored Roman prestige and solidified his reputation as a commander. Yet, the political landscape remained treacherous. Julia had been exiled in 2 BC for her scandals, and Tiberius's mother, Livia, was a formidable force behind the scenes, orchestrating alliances to secure her son's position. Ancient historians like Tacitus and Suetonius portrayed Livia as a master manipulator, though modern scholars question whether her influence was exaggerated by hostile sources. What is undeniable is that Livia's efforts kept Tiberius in contention, even when Augustus wavered. As the years passed, Tiberius's relationship with Augustus grew increasingly complex. The emperor respected Tiberius's competence, but never warmed to him personally. Tiberius, in turn, harbored a quiet resentment, feeling like a pawn in Augustus's dynastic chess game. By 14 AD, Augustus's health was failing, and the question of succession could no longer be delayed. On his deathbed, Augustus named Tiberius as his successor, but not without a final note of ambivalence. Some accounts claim he remarked, "Poor Rome, to be chewed by those slow jaws," a cryptic jab at Tiberius's temperament. Whether true or not, the comment captures the tension that defined their relationship. When Augustus died in 14 AD, Tiberius, at the age of 55, became emperor. It was a moment of triumph, but also one of trepidation. He had spent decades proving his worth, enduring personal sacrifices, and navigating the treacherous waters of Roman politics. Yet he ascended the throne not as a celebrated hero, but as a man weary of the role thrust upon him. The empire he inherited was vast and stable, but it was also a fragile construct, held together by Augustus's charisma and authority. Tiberius, reserved and uncharismatic, faced the daunting task of filling those shoes. His path to the throne had forged him into a man of contradictions, a brilliant general who shunned glory, a dutiful son who resented his duty, a leader who craved solitude. As we move into the next chapter, we'll see how these contradictions shaped his reign, a period of stability and suspicion, loyalty and betrayal, as Tiberius stepped into the shadows of imperial power. In the summer of 14 AD, As the news of Augustus's death spread across the Roman Empire, a new era dawned. Tiberius Claudius Nero, at the age of 55, ascended to the throne as Rome's second emperor. The empire he inherited was a colossus, stretching from the Atlantic to the Euphrates, its legions unmatched, its wealth unparalleled. Yet it was an empire built on the charisma and vision of Augustus, a man whose legacy loomed large. Tiberius, reserved, stoic, and burdened by decades of personal and political trials, now faced the monumental task of governing a world that expected another Augustus. In this chapter, we'll explore Tiberius's reign, a 23-year odyssey marked by shrewd administration, growing paranoia, the shadowy influence of Sejanus, and a retreat into isolation that would define his legacy. This is the story of an emperor who stabilized Rome but lost its heart. Tiberius's ascension was not greeted with universal acclaim. Unlike Augustus, who had mastered the art of public adoration, Tiberius was a private man, uncomfortable with the theatrics of power. His first act as emperor set the tone for his reign. When the Senate offered him the title of emperor, Tiberius hesitated, expressing reluctance to accept the full scope of imperial authority. Some saw this as humility, others as indecision or even hypocrisy. Ancient historians like Tacitus suggest Tiberius was playing a political game, feigning modesty to avoid accusations of tyranny. Whatever his motives, this hesitation alienated the Senate, who craved the decisive leadership of Augustus. Tiberius's reluctance to embrace the imperial mantle created an immediate rift, one that would widen over the years. Despite his uneasy start, Tiberius proved himself a capable administrator. His approach to governance was rooted in pragmatism and efficiency, reflecting his years as a general. He prioritized financial stability, a critical concern for an empire bloated by Augustus's ambitious projects. Tiberius curtailed extravagant spending, reduced subsidies for public games, and cracked down on tax evasion in the provinces. These measures replenished Rome's treasury, ensuring the empire's economic health. He also maintained a policy of military restraint, avoiding costly wars of conquest. Instead, he focused on consolidating Rome's borders, particularly in Germania and the eastern provinces, where his earlier campaigns had laid a strong foundation. His legions remained disciplined, and the empire's frontiers were secure, a testament to his strategic foresight. Tiberius's relationship with the Senate was another cornerstone of his early reign. Augustus had ruled as a partner to the Senate, preserving the illusion of republican governance. Tiberius sought to emulate this, encouraging senators to take an active role in decision-making. He attended Senate meetings regularly, listened to debates, and refrained from imposing his will outright. But his reserved demeanor and cryptic communication style frustrated the senators, who found him difficult to read. Unlike Augustus, who charmed with eloquence, Tiberius's speeches were dry and legalistic, lacking the warmth that inspired loyalty. Over time, the Senate's frustration grew, and Tiberius's attempts at collaboration were met with suspicion, as many believed he was testing their loyalty rather than seeking genuine partnership. The first major challenge of Tiberius's reign came in 14 AD, shortly after his accession. Mutinies broke out among the legions in Pannonia and Germania, where soldiers demanded better pay and conditions. The unrest threatened to destabilize the empire, and Tiberius acted swiftly, dispatching his nephew Germanicus, the popular young general, to quell the rebellions. Germanicus's success in restoring order bolstered Tiberius's authority, but it also highlighted a growing tension. Germanicus, charismatic and beloved, was seen by many as a more fitting heir to Augustus's legacy. Tiberius, aware of Germanicus's popularity, supported his campaigns but kept him at a distance, wary of his potential to overshadow the throne. When Germanicus died suddenly in 19 AD under mysterious circumstances, rumors swirled that Tiberius or his mother, Livia, had orchestrated his demise. Modern historians dismiss these claims as propaganda, but the scandal deepened public distrust of Tiberius. As Tiberius navigated the complexities of imperial rule, a new figure emerged in Rome's political landscape: Lucius alias Sejanus, the ambitious commander of the Praetorian Guard. Sejanus was a master manipulator, skilled at exploiting Tiberius's insecurities. He positioned himself as the emperor's most trusted advisor, offering loyalty in a court rife with suspicion. Tiberius, who had always struggled to connect with Rome's elite, found in Sejanus a seemingly reliable ally. By the early 20s AD, Sejanus's influence was undeniable. He centralized the Praetorian Guard in a single barracks in Rome, transforming it into a powerful political force. He also began to cultivate a network of informants, feeding Tiberius reports of disloyalty among the aristocracy. This marked the beginning of a darker phase in Tiberius's reign, as Sejanus's machinations sowed seeds of paranoia. Sejanus's rise coincided with Tiberius's growing disillusionment with Rome. The emperor, weary of the Senate's bickering and the city's relentless scrutiny, began to withdraw from public life. In 26 AD, he made a fateful decision. He left Rome for the island of Capri, a secluded retreat off the Bay of Naples. This move stunned the Roman elite. Emperors were expected to be visible, presiding over the Senate and engaging with the people. Tiberius's retreat was seen as an abdication of duty, and it handed Sejanus unprecedented power. From Capri, Tiberius governed through letters, relying on Sejanus to manage the day-to-day affairs of the empire. Sejanus seized the opportunity, consolidating his influence and positioning himself as the de facto ruler of Rome. Under Sejanus's influence, the political climate in Rome grew increasingly oppressive. The charge of maiestas, or treason, became a weapon to eliminate rivals. Senators, equestrians, and even members of the imperial family faced accusations of disloyalty, often based on flimsy evidence. Trials were swift, and convictions carried severe penalties: exile, confiscation of property, or execution. Sejanus orchestrated these purges with ruthless efficiency, targeting those who opposed him or stood in the way of his ambitions. Among his victims were members of Germanicus's family, including Agrippina the Elder, Germanicus's widow, and her sons, who were seen as potential rivals to Tiberius's succession plans. The purges created a climate of fear, as no one felt safe from accusation. Tiberius's role in these purges is a matter of debate. Ancient sources like Tacitus portray him as complicit, approving Sejanus's actions from Capri. Modern historians, however, suggest Tiberius was manipulated, his trust in Sejanus blinding him to the extent of the abuses. Regardless, the purges damaged Tiberius's reputation. The Roman elite, once hopeful for a collaborative reign, now viewed him as a distant tyrant, ruling through fear. The common people, too, grew resentful, as Tiberius's absence from Rome and his austerity measures, such as cutting funds for public games, eroded his popularity. Sejanus's ambitions reached their peak in the early 30s AD. He sought to marry into the imperial family and position himself as Tiberius's successor, but his overreach proved his undoing. In 31 AD, Tiberius received a letter from his sister-in-law, Antonia, warning him of Sejanus's treachery. The emperor, though isolated on Capri, was not as detached as many believed. In a stunning display of political acumen, Tiberius orchestrated Sejanus's downfall. He sent a carefully worded letter to the Senate praising Sejanus while subtly signaling his arrest. The Senate, sensing the shift, turned on Sejanus. He was seized, tried, and executed within hours, along with many of his supporters. The purge of Sejanus's faction was brutal, with hundreds executed or driven to suicide. The fall of Sejanus was a turning point, but it did little to restore Tiberius's reputation. The emperor remained on Capri, increasingly isolated and distrustful. The treason trials continued, as Tiberius sought to root out any remaining threats. His final years were marked by a deepening sense of paranoia, fueled by the betrayals he had endured. Ancient sources like Suetonius paint a lurid picture of Tiberius's life on Capri, alleging debauchery and cruelty. Modern scholars caution that these accounts are likely exaggerated, reflecting the biases of historians writing under later emperors. What is clear is that Tiberius was a man consumed by the weight of his role, haunted by the fear of betrayal. Tiberius's reign, though marred by controversy, was not without achievements. He left the empire financially robust, with a surplus in the treasury. His military restraint preserved Rome's resources, and his administrative reforms strengthened provincial governance. Yet, these successes were overshadowed by the fear and division that characterized his rule. Tiberius never returned to Rome, governing from Capri until his death in 37 AD at the age of 77. His passing was met with relief by many, and his successor, Caligula, Germanicus's son, was hailed as a liberator. As we reflect on Tiberius's reign, we see a man of contradictions, a capable ruler undone by his inability to connect, a general who stabilized an empire but lost its trust. His story is a cautionary tale of power's isolating force, of loyalty betrayed, and of a legacy tarnished by suspicion. In our next chapter, we'll explore the final years of Tiberius's life and the enduring questions about his character, as we ask, was he a tyrant, a victim, or something far more complex? By the late 20s AD, Tiberius, Rome's second emperor, had withdrawn from the heart of the empire he governed. Ensconced on the secluded island of Capri, far from the bustling forums and scheming senators of Rome, he ruled an empire that spanned millions through letters and proxies. The man who had once led legions to victory and stabilized Rome's finances now seemed a ghostly figure. His presence felt only in the fear and suspicion that gripped the capital. In this final chapter of Tiberius's story, we'll explore his years of isolation, the myths and scandals that swirled around him, his death in 37 AD, and the complex legacy he left behind. Was Tiberius a tyrant consumed by paranoia, a weary ruler betrayed by those he trusted, or a misunderstood figure whose contributions to Rome were overshadowed by his enemies' pens? Let's step into the shadows of Capri and uncover the truth. Tiberius's retreat to Capri in 26 AD marked a turning point in his reign. The island, with its rugged cliffs and azure waters, was a world apart from Rome's political cauldron. Here, Tiberius built a series of lavish villas, the most famous being the Villa Jovis, perched high above the sea. Ancient sources describe these villas as opulent retreats filled with art, gardens, and panoramic views. For Tiberius, Capri was both a sanctuary and a prison, a place to escape the pressures of imperial rule, but also a reflection of his growing isolation. His decision to leave Rome was unprecedented. Emperors were expected to be visible, presiding over the Senate, leading religious ceremonies, and engaging with the people. Tiberius's absence was seen as an abdication of duty, and it fueled resentment among the Roman elite and populace alike. Why did Tiberius abandon Rome? The reasons are complex, rooted in both personal and political factors. After over a decade as emperor, Tiberius was weary of the Senate's constant bickering and the relentless scrutiny of his actions. His strained relationship with the Roman aristocracy, who found his reserved nature aloof and unapproachable, had eroded his patience. The death of his mother, Livia, in 29 AD, removed a key ally who had long navigated Rome's political waters on his behalf. Moreover, the rise of Sejanus, the ambitious commander of the Praetorian Guard, had given Tiberius a trusted proxy to manage the capital. Sejanus's assurances that he could handle Rome's affairs allowed Tiberius to retreat, believing the empire was in capable hands. But this trust would prove to be his greatest miscalculation. From Capri, Tiberius governed through a network of couriers and informants, issuing decrees and receiving reports. His letters to the Senate were often cryptic, leaving room for misinterpretation and fueling accusations of indecision. Meanwhile, Sejanus tightened his grip on Rome, orchestrating a wave of treason trials that targeted perceived enemies. The charge of maestas became a tool to eliminate rivals, and the Senate, fearful of Sejanus's power, complied with his demands. The purges claimed prominent figures, including members of Germanicus's family, such as Agrippina the Elder and her sons, who were exiled or executed. These trials cast a pall over Rome, transforming the city into a place of suspicion and dread. Tiberius, isolated on Capri, was either unaware of the full extent of Sejanus's abuses or complicit in them, a question that continues to divide historians. The turning point came in 31 AD, when Tiberius's trust in Sejanus shattered. A letter from Antonia, the mother of Germanicus, warned the emperor of Sejanus's plot to seize power. Sejanus had grown bold, seeking to marry into the imperial family and position himself as Tiberius's successor. Realizing the depth of the betrayal, Tiberius acted with ruthless precision. He sent a carefully crafted letter to the Senate, praising Sejanus while subtly signaling his arrest. The Senate, sensing the emperor's intent, turned on Sejanus with startling speed. He was seized, tried, and executed within hours, his body desecrated by an angry mob. The purge that followed was merciless, targeting Sejanus's allies, family, and even his young children. Hundreds were executed or driven to suicide, and Rome was left reeling from the bloodbath. The fall of Sejanus was a triumph for Tiberius, demonstrating that even from Capri, he retained control over the empire. But it came at a cost. The purges deepened the climate of fear, and Tiberius's reputation suffered irreparable damage. The Roman elite, already alienated by his absence, now viewed him as a tyrant who ruled through terror. The common people, who had once benefited from his financial reforms, grew disillusioned with an emperor who seemed indifferent to their needs. Tiberius's decision to remain on Capri only compounded these perceptions. He never returned to Rome, choosing instead to govern from his island fortress, surrounded by a small circle of advisors and guards. The final years of Tiberius's life were shrouded in controversy, fueled by lurid accounts from ancient historians like Suetonius and Tacitus. These sources paint a sensational picture of Tiberius's life on Capri, alleging debauchery, cruelty, and perverse indulgences. They describe secret chambers in the Villa Jovis where Tiberius engaged in scandalous acts, surrounded by a retinue of sycophants and enslaved individuals. Stories of his spintriae, or pleasure seekers, and his alleged obsession with astrology and mysticism became fodder for Rome's rumor mill. These accounts, however, must be approached with skepticism. Suetonius and Tacitus wrote decades after Tiberius's death, under emperors who had reasons to vilify their predecessors. Their works often reflect the biases of a later era, when the Julio-Claudian dynasty was demonized to legitimize new rulers. Modern historians argue that many of these stories were exaggerated or fabricated, designed to portray Tiberius as a moral and political failure. What is more likely is that Tiberius's isolation on Capri reflected his deepening paranoia and disillusionment. The betrayals he had endured, from Sejanus, from the Senate, and even from members of his own family, left him distrustful of those around him. His reliance on informants grew, and the treason trials continued, though at a slower pace after Sejanus's fall. Tiberius's health also began to decline, and ancient sources describe him as frail and reclusive, spending hours gazing at the sea from his villa's terraces. His once sharp mind, honed by years of military and political maneuvering, was clouded by the weight of his role. Yet, even in his isolation, Tiberius remained engaged with the empire's administration, issuing edicts to maintain stability and overseeing provincial appointments. The question of succession loomed large in Tiberius's final years. With Germanicus's sons either dead or disgraced, the most prominent candidate was Gaius Julius Caesar, better known as Caligula, the youngest son of Germanicus. Tiberius adopted Caligula as his heir, but their relationship was strained. Ancient sources suggest Tiberius harbored doubts about Caligula's temperament, reportedly remarking that he was nursing a viper in Rome's bosom. Whether this reflects Tiberius's foresight or later embellishment is unclear, but it underscores the uncertainty surrounding the succession. Tiberius's other potential heir, Gemellus, his grandson, was young and lacked the political clout to compete with Caligula's popularity. Tiberius died on March 16, 37 AD, at the age of 77, in his villa at Misenum, not far from Capri. The circumstances of his death are murky. Suetonius claims that Caligula, eager to seize power, may have smothered Tiberius or withheld food from the ailing emperor. Other accounts suggest natural causes, given Tiberius's advanced age and declining health. Whatever the truth, his death was met with celebration in Rome. Crowds reportedly shouted, "To the Tiber with Tiberius," a call to desecrate his body by throwing it into the river, a fate reserved for criminals. The Senate, however, ensured Tiberius received a proper funeral, though without the divine honors bestowed on Augustus. Tiberius's legacy is one of the most contested in Roman history. His reign was a paradox. He inherited a stable empire and left it stronger, yet he was reviled by those he governed. His financial reforms filled Rome's treasury, saving the empire from the excesses of Augustus's later years. His military restraint preserved resources and avoided the quagmires of overexpansion. His provincial administration was efficient, with governors held to strict standards. Yet, these achievements were overshadowed by the fear and division that defined his rule. The treason trials, the purges, and his absence from Rome painted him as a distant, tyrannical figure. The rise and fall of Sejanus, orchestrated under his watch, became a symbol of his failure to control those closest to him. Ancient historians were unkind to Tiberius, portraying him as a villain to contrast with the idealized Augustus or the tragic Germanicus. Tacitus, in his Annals, describes Tiberius as a hypocrite whose reluctance to rule masked a cruel streak. Suetonius's lurid tales of Capri cemented Tiberius's image as a depraved recluse. Yet, modern scholars offer a more nuanced view. They argue that Tiberius was a product of his time, navigating an empire that was still adjusting to the realities of autocratic rule. His reluctance to embrace imperial pomp may reflect a genuine desire to preserve republican ideals, even if his methods alienated the Senate. His trust in Sejanus, while misguided, was a rational response to the challenges of governing a vast empire from a distance. Tiberius's legacy also lies in the empire he passed to Caligula. The stability he maintained, allowed Rome to weather the chaos of Caligula's reign and the subsequent Julio-Claudian emperors. His administrative reforms laid the groundwork for the empire's longevity, even if his personal unpopularity obscured these contributions. In the broader sweep of Roman history, Tiberius is a bridge between the golden age of Augustus and the turmoil that followed, a ruler who held the line but paid a heavy price. As we close this chapter, we're left with a question. Who was Tiberius? A tyrant consumed by power, a victim of betrayal, or a man who did his duty under impossible circumstances? His story is a reminder of the human cost of empire, of the toll that power exacts on those who wield it. In our next installment, we'll turn to Caligula, the young emperor whose reign would plunge Rome into chaos. Was he the madman of legend, or another misunderstood figure? Join us as we continue this journey through the heart of Rome's imperial saga. As the spring of 37 AD approached, Tiberius, Rome's second emperor, stood at the twilight of his life. For over 2 decades, he had ruled an empire that stretched from the windswept shores of Britannia to the sun-scorched deserts of Syria. From his secluded villa on the island of Capri, he had governed with a steady hand, preserving the stability forged by Augustus. Yet his reign was a paradox, marked by administrative brilliance and overshadowed by paranoia, purges, and a retreat from the city he was meant to lead. In this final chapter, we'll explore the circumstances of Tiberius's death, the immediate aftermath, the historical debates that have shaped his legacy, and what his story reveals about the nature of power in Rome. As we close this journey, we'll also look ahead to the next chapter in Rome's saga, the rise of Caligula, the emperor who would inherit Tiberius's throne and plunge the empire into chaos. Tiberius's final years were a study in isolation. Ensconced in the Villa Jovis on Capri, he had become a distant figure, ruling through letters and a dwindling circle of trusted advisors. The betrayal of Sejanus in 31 AD had deepened his distrust of those around him, and the treason trials that followed cast a long shadow over his reign. Ancient sources describe Tiberius as frail and reclusive, his once robust frame weakened by age and illness. At 77, he was among the oldest men in Rome, a survivor of the brutal politics that had claimed so many of his contemporaries. Yet, his mind remained sharp, and he continued to oversee the empire's administration, issuing edicts to maintain order in the provinces and appointing governors to keep the machinery of empire running smoothly. The question of succession loomed large as Tiberius's health declined. His chosen heir was Gaius Julius Caesar, better known as Caligula, the youngest son of the beloved general Germanicus. Caligula, in his mid-20s, was charismatic and popular, a stark contrast to Tiberius's reserved demeanor, but their relationship was fraught. Ancient historians like Suetonius claim Tiberius harbored misgivings about Caligula's character, reportedly describing him as a viper who would bring ruin to Rome. Whether this reflects Tiberius's genuine concerns or later embellishment is uncertain, but it hints at the unease surrounding the succession. Tiberius's other potential heir, his grandson Tiberius Gemellus, was young and lacked the political clout to challenge Caligula's claim. The stage was set for a transition that would prove tumultuous. Tiberius's death came on March 16, 37 AD, at a villa in Misenum, near Capri. The circumstances remain shrouded in mystery, fueling speculation that persists to this day. According to Suetonius, Tiberius fell ill and slipped into a coma, prompting his entourage to proclaim Caligula emperor. But when Tiberius unexpectedly stirred, Caligula's ally, Macro, the new commander of the Praetorian Guard, allegedly smothered him with a pillow to secure the succession. Other accounts suggest Tiberius died of natural causes, his body weakened by years of stress and illness. The truth is likely lost to history, but the story of his murder reflects the hostility Tiberius faced in his final years. His death was met with jubilation in Rome. Crowds reportedly gathered in the streets, shouting, "To the Tiber with Tiberius," a call to desecrate his body by throwing it into the river, a punishment reserved for traitors. The Senate, however, ensured he received a proper funeral, though without the divine honors granted to Augustus. The immediate aftermath of Tiberius's death saw a swift transfer of power to Caligula. The young emperor was hailed as a liberator, a symbol of hope after Tiberius's austere and fearful reign. Caligula's early acts, releasing political prisoners, restoring funds for public games, and honoring his father Germanicus, won him widespread acclaim. But the seeds of instability sown during Tiberius's reign would soon bear fruit. The centralization of the Praetorian Guard under Sejanus, the erosion of senatorial authority, and the precedent of treason trials created a volatile political landscape that Caligula would exploit with devastating consequences. Tiberius's death marked the end of an era, but it also set the stage for the chaos that would define the next chapter of Rome's history. Tiberius's legacy is one of the most debated in Roman history, a battleground for historians ancient and modern. To his critics, he was a tyrant whose paranoia and absence from Rome poisoned the empire. Ancient historians like Tacitus and Suetonius painted a damning portrait, depicting Tiberius as a hypocrite who feigned reluctance to rule while wielding power with cruelty. Tacitus's annals describe him as a master of deception, whose reserved demeanor masked a vindictive streak. Suetonius's Lives of the Caesars is even more sensational, recounting tales of debauchery on Capri, from secret pleasure chambers to perverse indulgences. These accounts shaped Tiberius's image for centuries, casting him as a villain in the grand narrative of Rome's imperial saga. Yet, modern scholars offer a more nuanced view, challenging the biases of ancient sources. Tacitus and Suetonius wrote under later emperors, whose regimes benefited from vilifying the Julio-Claudians to legitimize their own rule. Their accounts often rely on rumor and exaggeration, reflecting the prejudices of a Roman elite that resented Tiberius's aloofness. Scholars argue that many of the scandals attributed to Tiberius, particularly the lurid tales of Capri, were likely fabricated or amplified to discredit him. The reality of his life on Capri was probably far less sensational, a mix of administrative work, intellectual pursuits like astrology, and the solitude of a man worn down by betrayal. The treason trials, while brutal, were not unprecedented. They built on legal mechanisms established under Augustus to protect the imperial system. Tiberius's reliance on Sejanus, though a grave error, was a rational response to the challenges of governing a vast empire from a distance. Tiberius's achievements, often overlooked, were significant. His financial reforms left Rome's treasury with a surplus, a remarkable feat given the excesses of Augustus's later years. By curbing extravagant spending and cracking down on tax evasion, he ensured the empire's economic stability. His military restraint, avoiding costly wars of conquest, preserved Rome's resources and strengthened its borders. His provincial administration was efficient, with governors held to high standards of accountability. These policies laid a foundation for the empire's longevity, enabling it to endure the upheavals of later emperors. Tiberius's reign, though unpopular, was a period of consolidation, bridging the golden age of Augustus and the turbulence of the Julio-Claudian successors. The paradox of Tiberius's legacy lies in his inability to win the hearts of those he governed. Unlike Augustus, who mastered the art of public relations, Tiberius was a private man, ill-suited to the performative demands of imperial rule. His reserved nature, dry rhetoric, and absence from Rome alienated the Senate and populace, who craved the charisma of his predecessor. His trust in Sejanus and the subsequent purges cemented his image as a tyrant, even if he was not the architect of every injustice. Tiberius's story is a cautionary tale of the isolating nature of power, of how a capable leader can be undone by personal flaws and the machinations of those around him. Reflecting on Tiberius's place in Roman history, we see a man shaped by his circumstances. Born into a world of civil war, raised under the shadow of Augustus, and thrust into a role he never fully embraced, Tiberius navigated challenges that would have broken lesser men. His reluctance to rule as a god-king may reflect a lingering attachment to republican ideals, a desire to govern as a partner to the Senate rather than a dictator. Yet the realities of imperial rule, the need for absolute control, the constant threat of betrayal, forced him into a role that clashed with his instincts. Tiberius's reign reveals the fragility of Rome's early empire, a system dependent on the personality of its leader and vulnerable to the ambitions of those in its orbit. Tiberius's story also invites us to question the nature of historical judgment. The sources that define him were written by men with agendas, their words shaped by the politics of their time. By peeling back the layers of bias, we uncover a more complex figure, not a hero, but not a monster either. Tiberius was a man who did his duty, preserving an empire while sacrificing his own peace. His failures were human, his successes enduring, yet history remembers him through the lens of his enemies. In this, Tiberius reminds us that truth is often the first casualty of power. As we close this journey through Tiberius's life, we stand at the threshold of a new chapter in Rome's saga. Caligula, the young emperor who succeeded Tiberius, would take the empire to dizzying heights and terrifying lows. Was he the madman of legend, driven by cruelty and excess, or a ruler misunderstood by a system that demanded perfection? His reign would test the foundations laid by Tiberius, exposing the strengths and flaws of Rome's imperial experiment. Join us in our next video as we dive into the enigma of Caligula, a man whose name would become synonymous with tyranny. For now, we leave Tiberius in the shadows of Capri, a ruler whose legacy challenges us to look beyond the myths and seek the man beneath. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Tiberius's life. If you've been captivated by his story, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to stay with us as we unravel the next chapter of Rome's epic history. Share your thoughts in the comments. Was Tiberius a misunderstood ruler or a tyrant who got what he deserved? We'll see you next time as we step into the volatile world of Caligula. Until then, keep exploring the past, for it holds the keys to understanding our present.